New Philadelphia Eagles defensive coordinator Vic Fangio desperately needs Howie Roseman to make a splash at safety this offseason. Lucky for him, there's a lot of options in free agency. We'll get into those options coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Eagles fans? I'm Louie DiBiase, co-host of the Locked On Eagles podcast, analyst also over at Bleacher Report. He's Gino Camilleri, our scouting director, Eagles content at Bleacher Report, and my co-host on today's edition of Locked On Eagles. It's time for Howie Roseman to stop half-assing it at safety and bring in a stud. We look at a loaded free agent pool, discuss our favorite ideas and the most likely options for the Birds. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDON in all capital letters for $20 off your first purchase. This is our final defensive version of our offseason options series. And Gino, you know what's funny? Just a quick rant. I did notice, I was listening back to our last few episodes, and I couldn't help but notice through these shows we've been bringing up, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 options that Howie Roseman could pay, but it felt like within each discussion we were really focusing more on the tier 2 player, regardless of what position it was, when it was edge, defensive tackle, but even more so at cornerback and linebacker. And I think we had the right to do that because me and you have been watching the Eagles and Howie Roseman's tendencies for a long time. We know the history of what he does at these spots. So we were just trying to talk about the most realistic options. But it did kind of annoy me that listening back, me and you are kind of already assuming that they're going to kind of make these not average moves, but we're kind of doubting they're going to make a big splash. And I know in the past that's worked out for Howie a lot, going for these type of players, and you can't invest a big contract and a big pick in every single position every year, right? So the Rodney McLeods have worked, Kazir White, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, James Bradbury. Like, these weren't first-round picks or giant contracts or massive trades. But at the same time, Howie Roseman has let it get to after the draft in back-to-back off seasons where there were significant holes at corner, safety, linebacker, and he had to bank on Bradbury being there in May or CGJ in August when their June signing of Jaquiski Tart didn't work. He had to add Zach Cunningham and Kevin Byard in season because he went thrift shopping for Terrell Edmonds and Nicholas Morrow. I'm just kind of sick of him half-assing at these spots, and of all these positions, maybe outside of corner, safety is a place that you have to make a splash for Vic Fangio's defense. And you've been clamoring for this since we started the show together in 2018.
And a big reason for that was, funny enough, I was living below Corey Graham's older brother at the time, and he's one guy that it took them until August to re-sign him after that
another
Super
good
Bowl
example.
year because they didn't have anybody at that position. They needed to bring him in as that number 3 guy, and they did that the year before as well. And it seems like every single year they're doing the same exact thing, and they're not going all in. And there's a great Ron Swanson quote from Parks and Rec: if you can't half-ass 2 things, you got to whole-ass 1 thing. And that's really what it feels like at this position, is that it's enough of just beating around the bush. It's enough of, let's see what is there. And especially now, because the market is absolutely loaded right now. And even in our discussion between our hosts on Locked On NFL, guys like Ross Jackson down at Locked On Saints, he's like, we want to get out of this Marcus May contract that we were talking about signing him on our show not too long ago. And there's guys out there like Kyle Duggar, Antoine Winfield, Jordan Fuller, Kamren Curl. Go down the list. It is absolutely loaded with young guys that are 25, 26 that can make an instant impact. You let one of those guys walk out the door, and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, which filled a huge role for you in 2022, and look what happened after that. Right? Marcus Epps should have been a Philadelphia Eagle last year. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson should have been a Philadelphia Eagle last year. And there's a big reason for that. And it's how big safety is in today's game. And we talk about the need for linebacker. And the thing about safety is you can make an impact at quite literally every level of the football field. These are guys that have to play down at the line of scrimmage. They have to be able to defend in that intermediate area. And they're the last guy, the last line of defense when it comes to playing that center field safety role, especially in Vic Fangio's defense, where he's going to allow his cornerbacks to be aggressive. Those guys on the back end, they have to be able to cover. They have to be able to use space to their advantage. And frankly, the guys that the Eagles brought in last year, Justin Evans, for example, they were the example of guys that were getting them in that situation to begin with.
Or Terrell Edmonds. I mean, it was
why we were here in the beginning and why you were trying to acquire Kevin Byard. And it's just because you never fully dipped your toe in. You were just waiting around the shallow end, waiting for the water to get to the right temperature. And it just never got to that temperature. And it's like, no, you need to go set the temperature, Howie Roseman.
Exactly. There can't always be a CGJ waiting for you a week before the regular season
It's not going to always work out like that. And you've seen that.
You can't just decide in the spring we're going to shop at AmVats at the thrift store for these positions and then hope it gets better. That's not a strategy, even though it's worked sometimes in the past. And it's weird that, Gino, you made a great point talking about the value of safety, that this position sometimes gets unfairly grouped in with linebacker as in a position that you shouldn't really invest a whole lot in. You shouldn't pay it compared to like the defensive line. But as you mentioned, safeties are responsible for so much nowadays where they have to be able to play safety. They have to be able to play a little bit of cornerback. They got to be able to play a little bit of linebacker. Why would, in a day and age where there's so many talented, versatile players on offense, would you go cheap at the most versatile position on defense? That makes zero sense to me.
And in the evolution of how these contracts have kind of, I would say, ballooned at some positions, the positions that they have ballooned at are ones that have to be versatile, have to be impactful in the pass game. And you talk about what a safety is. They're versatile and they have to be impactful in the pass game, and they play everywhere on the football field. Why are defensive linemen who, I mean, just because they have to move over a couple gaps, they get paid more because that's their versatility? I mean, safeties literally have to do 17 different jobs.
Look what Malcolm Jenkins used to do every single one of them. Yeah, man, he had Malcolm Jenkins back in the day had to do everything for this defense. So
why do you not pay that? Like, why do you not pay a tool that can do everything, for like a key that can unlock every door in your apartment complex? And you're like, no, I'm gonna just go down and
I'll just whole keep the janitor
closet
keys.
I'm gonna have this whole janitor ring full of key instead of the master key.
Right. And that's the thing, is the last two times Howie Roseman has had a stud like this, Malcolm Jenkins and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, both times he has let that guy walk in free agency. And I just think
Brian Dawkins, like, let's go back a little bit further.
Yeah,
I mean, come on.
It goes farther back. The only guy they've had for a long time was Rodney McLeod in a way. And I don't know, you'd think when you watch the 2022 Eagles, which was one of the best rosters, if not the best in franchise history, it's not a coincidence they made a Super Bowl with multiple studs at all these positions on defense in the second and third level. They had 2 studs at corner, 2 studs at linebacker, 2 studs at safety, and they made a Super Bowl, and yet it really didn't change Howie's strategy the following year. I want to believe this is the year that he does change it, just for what I'm not saying again to suddenly reverse everything and stop investing in the trenches and go so heavy at these other spots. But again, as we mentioned so many times in this podcast, we just want a few big time assets at these positions because they're so important and they killed you so badly this year.
He feels like that townie that goes to the same restaurant Monday through Friday, orders the same things, it's the same seat, and it's like, Howie, you don't need to go to Applebee's every single day, dude. Like, there's different restaurants down the road, and there's better food and better quality out there. And look at the teams that win big-time games. Look at how instrumental those guys are on the back end. I mean, Kansas City, year over year. Look at San Francisco. They go out and they draft Jair Brown, who has arguably the biggest play in the Super Bowl, when he goes and picks off Patrick Mahomes at one point. Why are you not doing that when other great teams around it? That's what I'm saying. Like, other great teams have great safeties. Your great teams had great safeties.
Exactly.
There's not a reason that the correlation is there. The reason is that safeties have to do everything. And if they could take away the other team's best player because they can do everything and they can be everywhere and they could take away a Travis Kelce who can do everything for that other team, pay him, dude. Like, pay him Jesse Bates money, pay him Marcus Williams money. I don't care if you can find that player, the master key, go and pay top dollar for it.
They, to me, got to make two big-time splash moves at corner, linebacker, and safety. Give me at least two, whether it's through a trade, draft pick, and or a big free agent contract. This has got to be the offseason. They do this. I think it's safety especially because there are some awesome options in free agency, and we'll get into those options coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
Talk about awesome options. We're going to give you some awesome options to look at some tickets. And I'm talking about on the Game Time app where you could quite literally look at the seat that you can have your view right on the phone. You don't even have to click inside of the view of the ticket where sometimes you're like, what section am I in? What seat? No. You're going to see exactly what your view is right on the Game Time app. They have zone deals, flash deals, tickets before the event, and even an hour after the event starts. And you are always guaranteed the best price. If you find tickets that are in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And like I said, you could see your view from your seat without even having to click into the ticket. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem your code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, I want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. Gino, I think adding a impact safety this offseason might be the most important thing Howie Roseman has to do from a personnel perspective on both sides of the football. When you talk about, and we've said this a few times on the show, the reliance of this position in Vic Fangio's defense when it comes to the need you have at the position this year, because Sidney Brown, I think, is going to be a stud, but he's going to be coming off a torn ACL. He probably will not be ready for week one. Reed Blankenship, to me, is ideally your third safety when you have a souped-up roster. Kevin Byard's probably going to get cut to free up $13-14 million in salary cap space. So when you combine those two things, as you've mentioned, the need to stop all these versatile weapons on offense, you got to have at least one stud playmaker at this position. Unfortunately, Antoine Winfield Jr. was franchise tagged this week, but outside of Winfield, like Gino, there's still a lot of options to go for that are not just like proven players, but players that are young and in their prime.
So if you just go on Over the Cap and sort this thing by age,
yeah,
for safety,
most of these guys
agents,
are in their prime that are available. Honestly,
Lou, it's for me.
Yeah.
This is candy cane lane. This is where I go into the shopping market. It's all
a lot of your boys are in this
candies.
one, man. Kyle Duggar. I mean, I'm seeing Darnell Savage in here.
Heck, you could go to the Xavier McKinney, steal him right from your opponent in the Giants there. And Kamren Curl is maybe one of the most underrated safeties in all football from the Commanders. And maybe the only guy who spells his name without an I in Geno Stone, who he took on first team role in Baltimore in a unit that you have to be versatile. You have to be able to defend the run. You have to be able to cover on the back end in Baltimore. That's something those guys had to be able to do. One guy that really piques my interest, and I was reading up on some of these guys, Deshaun Elliott played under Vic Fangio last year in Miami, is right in that under the radar category, not like top level players. Could you grab him and still at the same time have enough money to go and sign one of those bigger names that we're talking about, or even pair him with a Kyle Duggar? Or do you finally make like the John Johnson reunion for the Philly guy?
I feel like that's been every offseason.
Yeah, like you still have to make a signing like that on top of adding a premier guy. Like,
right, because Brown's not going to be ready to start the season. So you need multiple safeties.
Yes, and like I'm talking about a guy like that, and then go grab me a Darnell Savage.
Sure.
Somebody that
and you also do have the draft, but yeah, there's enough safeties in this pool of free agents where you could add two.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Taylor Rapp is a free agent. He's now played for multiple good teams. He was
our guy
Buffalo
Jeremy Chin's a free agent.
Dude, Alohi Gilman is out there. I mean, there's so many guys that you could just go up and down this list.
If you want to bring in a rotational piece, again, I don't love the idea of – I like Deshaun Elliott, but Eddie Jackson was just released from the Chicago Bears, and he's nowhere near the all-pro he was with Fangio in Chicago. But, as like your second safety signing,
Yes.
I don't even mind that to a degree. But, Gino, again, when it comes to the first big move, you love Kyle Duggar. Hopefully he does not get franchise tagged by the New England Patriots. Still has not this
I don't
week.
think he would.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Seems like a lot to pay him.
I think for Duggar, yeah. I love Xavier McKinney, who you mentioned. This guy was top 10 last year in coverage grades as a free safety.
I would
and
pay
in the
him
box.
a lot, and because
He's
it takes it away
maybe
from
my
the
favorite
Giants,
option.
too.
Yeah. He was the fourth highest graded safety last year. 7 combined interceptions and forcing completions, was top 20 the last 3 years. He's top 25 the last 3 years in yards allowed per target. This is a player that plays deep. He has the range. He can be physical in the box. Like, as you mentioned, you take that away from the Giants, another Bama kid. McKinney might be my, I wanted Winfield Jr. for sure. And, you love Kyle Duggar. I think McKinney might be the guy that I'm looking at the most.
And the way you got to look at this too is what are they trying to fill in terms of a role at safety?
That's true,
because Reed Blankenship, he can really do a lot of everything for you. Is he a top level cover guy? I wouldn't say that, but did he come up big for you in coverage? A lot of the time, but he's
the first
more
half of the year for sure. Yeah.
I'd like to see him 12 yards and in. That's where I want to see him operate. I think he'll do exceptional in Vic Fangio's defense where you got to fill the alley as these safeties.
Yeah.
I really want somebody that has that back end range, somebody that can run for days. Xavier McKinney, the Kyle Duggars, the guys that have that long
I agree.
speed.
That's kind of why I like Geno Stone, because he's not a great tackler coming downhill, but 7 interceptions last year in Baltimore.
Same with Darnell Savage. It's like, dude, you don't want him playing nickel corner for you, but if he has to go and cover their number 3 or 4 option, like 100%, that's a great position that you could be in with him. And these guys aren't going to break the bank, Lou, because the NFL doesn't value them. And there's so many. I mean, we forgot about Eddie Jackson, who just got released. And heck, Marcus May could get in this market from New Orleans if he is a cut due to the cap. And there's so many guys that you could make a realistic argument for. I mean, heck, even Ronnie Harrison from the Colts, a young guy he's still 27. And when he was on the Bears, we were making thoughts that he should come this way.
Julian Blackmon's a free agent. There is a name that we haven't mentioned, and I don't know if he would ever consider returning, but Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's a free agent. And that might be a way to just undo the biggest mistake you made last year. Would he come back, or was it times. He's the kind of guy that takes things personal, and there was a lot of back and forth when he left between fans, and I know that shouldn't be a deciding factor, but Chauncey's wired in a different way, and Howie was the first guy that didn't want to pay him what he thought he was worth. The entire NFL didn't after, but Howie kind of led that. So I would love to have him back. I just don't know if and I think the Eagles would want him back. I don't know if Chauncey would be willing to come back.
I feel like me and him are wired the same way, and it's like,
and somebody stole his car when he was here too. So that's
I would get him all the way to the contract room and then be like, sign a contract in another building and FaceTime him while I'm in that building. Yeah. But no, I love the idea. I love the idea because it fills exactly what you need.
And he wouldn't break the bank like he wanted to last year, right? He's going to have to sign
$6 million for Detroit, and he barely played this season because
he's going to have to sign another prove-it deal. Yeah.
No fault of his own. He's going to have to. And is it in Philadelphia? I don't know.
I doubt it, but
does it fill what you need? 150,000%. You don't have to use any asset to acquire him, and you already did technically. And do you want to say, oh, we use these draft picks and we got a comp pick, so technically we could just get him back for free? And I don't think he would be the guy to do that. But if you could, I'm in that window with you. And simply the law of supply and demand for safety, there are so many guys in a market that doesn't garner contracts that go north of double digits. How many of these guys are going to get that contract? Because Antoine Winfield was probably the only guy worthy of that type of deal in this market. I agree. Maybe a Xavier McKinney could fit into that.
He's close, but I still think he's on the outside of that tier.
I don't see any of these like elite safeties in this market,
but they're all very good.
That next level, like where we were talking Juan Thornhill territory last year for Kansas City, where played for a Super Bowl team coming off of his first contract. Very good young guy. Is he an elite player? No. Can he get number 1 minutes for you? 100%.
So you mentioned Kamren Curl earlier too. I think of anybody that makes the most sense from the Eagles' history. he makes a lot of sense. Like, that's a player that can line up anywhere, that's extremely underrated.
Yep.
If you were going to put a gun to my head, like, who's Howie's guy, Kamren Curl, I just think makes so much sense because there's a lot of people that
so mad because they're like, oh, look at the market, and it's like, oh, this guy's going to play.
It's not the sexy name of these other guys.
95% of the snaps for you, and he's going to have 65 tackles, and he's probably going to have 2 or 3 interceptions, and you're going to say, darn, Howie, you were right, but he can't make that mistake again. He's got to at least double dip somehow. He has to be the George Costanza here. Like, no matter what somebody at the party says, you're going to take a bite of that chip and you dip it again, man. Absolutely. Like, you know exactly where I was going with that.
Absolutely. Our favorite options at safety coming up next, and who we think is the most likely. That's going to round up offseason options right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 back if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with the All-Star break now over. It's time for the playoff push, quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, all that and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel is the official sportsbook partner of the NBA and the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Gino, so we're talking safety for one final segment here. Then we'll move on to offense throughout the week as we continue offseason options. I think, honestly, of all of the free agent classes we've discussed when it comes to edge rusher, defensive tackle, linebacker, corner, now safety, this might be the deepest we've seen. Edge rusher was pretty loaded too, but wouldn't you agree? I think safety has a lot of talent. Say that again?
This doesn't make much sense why there's this many good players.
Well, like you said, man, are teams devaluing this position where they're just not paying them like running back and linebacker, which is crazy to me, but that's what it kind of looks like.
I mean, even the older guys, like an Adrian Amos is still like bopping around the league.
And we haven't even talked about like the trade market. A guy like Justin Simmons might be available, Derwin James. I don't know why there's so many safeties available.
The whole market in general is just, I'm trying to find like a real life example. I mean, currently like in this inflation period, it almost feels like Arizona iced teas. It's like everything's going up like 300%. Arizona iced teas, like they're $1.25 still. Yeah, and that's what it feels like for safety. And from a football perspective, is
it like the increase in cover 2 defense where you don't need the one guy roaming?
I don't know,
so much?
Because the way I love studying this position, and I love it because they can do so much from so many different areas of the field where it's almost like you're playing battleship with these guys where you can do everything. And if you're thinking from a football perspective, if this guy's job and his resume does all of these things that other guys do, why shouldn't he get a little chunk of the money from the linebacker, a little chunk of the money from corner, a little chunk of the money from the defensive line? I don't understand that, but at the same time, teams aren't going to pay it. But it makes out that you're going to have such an exorbitant amount of guys in this market that are not going to get contracts that they are worth.
I was going to say, it benefits the Eagles,
it benefits them.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. Who would be your favorite option and then the one you think is most likely for Howie Roseman?
Oh, my favorite option?
Yeah.
Let's bring back our special teams ace and Rudy Ford and reunite him in Philadelphia. No, but I think if we're going to go down this well of picking guys from the Packers, I think Darnell Savage from a coverage element at safety is just something you didn't have last year. Because even if you have him and he is a liability in the run game, well, you had Sidney Brown and Reed Blankenship who were exceptionally good.
Great tacklers. Yeah.
Let them go do that. Darnell Savage can come and cover, and he's not going to break the bank for you. I think the most realistic one is somebody like a Julian Blackmon, somebody like a Deshaun Elliott, that you're not going to love it. It's not going to blow you out of the water, a Cam Curl type of signing. But I
would like the Cam Curl one. I think Cam Curl doesn't get enough respect where he would be. I mean, right now, in a lot of these free agent rankings, he's consistently within the top 4 or 5 names that are brought up. So he doesn't have the name value of an Xavier McKinney.
These aren't bad players. No.
But you're right. I would be upset if it was like if Blackmon is what they go for or a Jordan Whitehead. I'm going to be upset with that. That's not enough to me. Even if they only bring in Deshaun Elliott or they bring in only Eddie Jackson, like you said, they're going to need to double dip, whether it's through twice in free agency or the draft or trades, they're going to need to double dip. But if your big move is one of those former Fangio guys, I don't love that. To me, my favorite option is removing CGJ because that's the guy I want back. But if CGJ does not come back, I would want Xavier McKinney. I think the most likely would be Kamren Curl, or I think Geno Stone, because like you said, when you look at the style of safeties they have with Brown and Blankenship, those are great tacklers. Geno Stone is not, but he is a playmaker, and you desperately needed that. I mean, CGJ left with 6 interceptions in a season out the window, and you could not replace that. Geno Stone had 7 last year. Like, that is a ball hawk, and I think that's something this team could need. So I'd say Curl or Stone, gun to my head, would be the most likely in free agency.
My favorite for this class is just so tough because you could just say Jeremy Chin. You could just say all of the guys that I loved in that safety group. And
there's a lot of draft names that we talked about from this class. Yeah.
At that time, they had a need for all of these guys. And what did they do since then, Lou? Only recycled themselves back into the same exact position that they were 4 years ago when all of these guys were in said draft. And they're in a good position to help themselves out, though. Unlike other positions like corner, where you might have to truly overpay in a market that doesn't warrant it.
Yep.
Safety, you're not going to have to overpay. You're going to have the ability to have multiple different selections. This is truly a Baskin Robbins. Walk in there, sample everyone that you want, whatever you need at that safety position, you are going to be able to find it. And at the same time, I'm with you. The trade market is one where you're saying, there are so many good young defensive backs in this league and versatile ones at that.
Yeah.
And Justin Simmons could be a cut candidate because of his cap hit. And
so
guys,
could a guy like in Buffalo or Micah Hyde's a free agent if you want an older veteran, or a Jordan Poyer might be a cut candidate. There's a lot of names, and I don't love
Jordan
those.
Poyer in Philly.
Yeah, Jordan Poyer could come back. I mean, there's a lot of names at this position. I think Gino too. We've talked a lot about linebacker, safety, and corner the last few shows. I think it's going to be very telling, like how much they invest in free agency and in the draft at these spots. It'll be very telling their belief in Keely Ringo, Sidney Brown, and Nakobe Dean specifically. Those 3 staples, because if they only make these tier 2 kind of moves through free agency and the draft, or maybe they just make one splash move at these spots, it will say they believe in these guys a lot more than some think. And if they don't and they go all in, like, again, that's going to tell you a lot about their belief in the youth at these spots, because it's not a guarantee like it is the defensive line. Like, they're going to see through the development of Nolan Smith, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter. But in the second and third level, it's hit or miss. It's very up in the air.
And at the same time, what is the biggest investment you have put into this group? It's 3rd-round pick and Sidney Brown. And you're going to move on from Byard more than likely. And Reed Blankenship was a UDFA. Do you have any loyalty to bring in other guys
These
that
guys
could be
weren't
better
the
than
plan
them?
to be like the guy. Yeah, I mean, Dean was probably, but the others weren't.
And is it a necessity to go and sign a huge name? I wouldn't say it's a necessity because of what you have. But you just can't say, because I have a car that gets me to point A to point B, I'm not going to go and look at other cars, because when my car has 3 tires that are donuts and
I think it is a necessity. They need to make a splash.
That's what I'm saying. Like, the lights are out on both brakes and you can barely turn this thing on without putting 2 jumper cables together. That's what it felt like at the safety group at some times last year, because once Reed went out, and especially once Sidney went out, they didn't have anything. And
it's felt like that in all these
positions. He was a shell of himself last year.
I agree. It's felt like that at all 3 of these positions. I'm sick of thrift shopping. It's time for Howie to make a splash. We will talk about the offensive side, though. Yeah. We'll talk offense coming up next this week throughout the Locked On Eagles podcast as we continue offseason options. We thank you so much for making us your first listen each and every day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening. And let's go, Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.